On Friday, August 25th, 1939, the elderly pre-dreadnought battleship Schleswig-Holstein fired her guns in the port city of Danzig, quickly followed by the German national anthem. The sailors on board the ship wore their dress whites and stood rigidly at attention as the ship, guided by tugs, passed through the canal into the heart of the port. On the waterfront, men, women, and children stood and watched as the ship passed by, many of whom waved handkerchiefs and flags or even saluted the ship. Schleswig-Holstein, adorned with flags, came to the free city ostensibly for a goodwill visit to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the loss of the German cruiser Magdeburg in the Gulf of Finland. In reality, as tensions flared over the Polish corridor, Essex, as she was called by her crew, was there to stiffen the resolve of the people of Danzig and, if war broke out, use her 428cm guns and secondary armament against the Polish positions in the city. Within days, this festival-like atmosphere in the city completely changed as the world was plunged into the depths of the Second World War, in part due to the guns of this antiquated battleship. Having arrived the day prior on the 24th, the battleship, now tied up to the port on the 25th, had a large crowd gathered around her with bands and street performers to entertain the people. A large procession of Great War veterans and members of the Nazi Party led by Albert Forster, who was to take over the city once the German attack began, paraded around the large ship. Afterwards, the crew of the battleship took to the streets where large flags hung from buildings. As the crew of the ship relished in the excitement of the festivities, the ship's captain, Gustav Kleikamp, understood that the city's fate would probably be decided while a ship remained in the harbor. I think a quote from the book Blitzkrieg Unleashed, The German Invasion of Poland, 1939 by Richard Hardgraves, illustrates the scene perfectly. The mood this fine August day was festive. As the venerable battleship tied up, a huge crowd milled around on the quay. Bands and street performers entertained the people. A large procession of Great War veterans, SA brown shirts, and political leaders led by Albert Forster filed aboard. The crew were lauded in the streets, where large swastika flags swayed from buildings and huge banners were stretched from one side to the other. Sailors of Führer welcomed to German Danzig. Only one man did not relish in the visit to the free city, Captain Gustav Kleikamp, Essex's commanding officer. Publicly, he was filled with confidence and determination. Danzig's fate would probably be decided during the battleship's visit. Defending it, he told his crew, must fill us with pride. Yet privately, Kleikamp was nervous, depressed. I have a terrible mission which I cannot reconcile with my conscience, he confided in Karl Burkhardt during a reception at the diplomat's home. The Linienschiff, or battleship Kleikamp commanded, came from a different era, being part of the 1905 building program of the Imperial German Navy and being laid down around the same time as HMS Dreadnought, the ship that made her obsolete. Schleswig-Holstein saw service throughout the Great War and even participated in several actions, including the Battle of Jutland. Following the war, she was one of the outdated pre-dreadnoughts that the new Reichsmarine was allowed to keep, according to the Treaty of Versailles. In the interwar period, she was modernized to a certain extent, notably her secondary battery, and helped to train the sailors of the German Navy. Eventually, as Hitler pursued more and more aggressive foreign policies, she found herself on the front lines of the next war. The free city of Danzig that Essex found herself in was created after the First World War and was neither under Polish or German rule. Encompassing more than the port, the territory stretched for 760 miles with more than 350,000 people living within its borders, majority of which were German. The city enjoyed its own currency, flag, stamps, and anthem. However, like other territories of the former German Empire, Germany's leaders lusted for possession over the Polish corridor, as it was known, encompassing both Polish territory and the Free City. With possession of the land, it would connect the exclave of East Prussia to the new empire. To take from the gathering storm the naval war in Northern Europe, September 1939 to April 1940 by Gerhard. After World War I, the Prussian city of Danzig was made a semi-autonomous, demilitarized city-state under the protection of the League of Nations, with international representatives taking on the role of High Commissioner. Although it was officially independent of both Germany and Poland, German influence remained strong, and with an overwhelmingly German population, Danzig was to become the catalyst for releasing Nazi aggression on Poland. During the late 1920s and 1930s, The National Socialist Party was present in the Parliament of Danzig but gained little traction until a fanatical leader emerged who began to galvanize the German nationalists within the territory, Albert Forster. Forster was a former bank clerk from southern Germany who came to the city to build up the party. As economic woes came and Polish provocation occurred, the majority German population began warming up to what Forster had to say. Still, as the 1930s came to a close, there was still quite a large Polish population. That in August of 1939, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop ignored as he briefly negotiated with Polish Ambassador Josef Lipski, with the British Ambassador Neville Henderson acting as an intermediary. The 16-point ultimatum was presented to Lipski, to which he did not have the authority to negotiate, leading to continued deadlock as German and Polish forces mustered. As these late days of August passed, some of the sailors of Schleswig-Holstein's band played martial music, while other sailors marched in parades almost daily to cheering crowds of ethnic Germans. In this festive atmosphere amongst these crowds were assault troops who wore sports clothing to avoid arousing suspicion. These assault troops, under the command of Oberleutnant Wilhelm Menningsen, some 225 men of the 3rd Marine Shock Troop Company. Still, these crowds of ethnic Germans, sailors, and SS members became unruly, shouting anti-Semitic phrases and threatening both the Polish and Jewish population of the city. Hargraves illustrates the tense scene. In Danzig, the band of the Schleswig-Holstein performed martial music, while sailors took part in a parade of flags almost daily. A singular thought dominated the mind of the bandmaster, Oberleutnant Willi Aulich. His musicians had to be ready for a concert to be broadcast on local radio on Sunday, September 3rd. As crowds of Danzigers heaved to and fro on the quayside, assault troops moved among them to board the aged Battleship. The men wore sports clothing to avoid raising suspicions. "Our situation seems to be getting more tense," Aulich observed. "Hopefully there'll be a decision soon." There would. Danzigers knew it. There would soon be a decision, as the date was, in fact, August 31st, 1939. It appeared that negotiations between the Polish and German governments were futile, not to mention the Gleiwitz radio incident was happening that night, all but confirming that war was inevitable. Aboard Schleswig-Holstein, the bandmaster, the same one from earlier, was woken up shortly after 1 a.m. As he had gotten out of bed, he noticed that swinging from the battleship's cranes were motorcycles amongst other equipment the assault troops needed. While in East Prussia, men were waiting to cross into the Free City on trains to help capture it. Later on the morning of September 1st, 1939, at 4:30 a.m., as the sky changed color and the dark night gave way to the faint light of the day, the crew of the Pre-dreadnought battleship waited anxiously. Marine shock troops clambered into position to await the order to storm the Westerplatte, where the Polish ammunition depot was, nearly 600 yards away. The main battery of Schleswig-Holstein trained towards the Westerplatte, and Captain Kleikamp clutched Admiral Schrader's order of the day, which reads as follows: "The hour of the decision finds us ready to respond for honor, right, and the freedom of our fatherland. Aware of our glorious tradition, we will wage this struggle with unshakable faith in our Führer and in the firm belief in the greatness of our people and our Reich." As the sailors heard the order of the day read by Captain Kleikamp, Stuka dive bombers were beginning to appear over Poland near the Free City and began to drop bombs on strategic positions like railways and bridges. In 11 minutes, the dive bombers hit their targets, and by 4:34, the war was on. German soldiers in the city had already started to concentrate around critical positions like the railway station or post office. Observing the usual busy Friday morning with people heading to work, all to be disturbed by the distinct thunderous roar of artillery. Shortly after 4:45, taking from Haringen, at 4:47 on September 1st, Captain Kleikamp gave the order to open fire in earnest, releasing the carnage that would become World War II. In the next 6 minutes, 59 regular and 8 armor-piercing 28cm shells slammed into the Westerplatte from the battleship's forward turret. Some of the 15cm guns joined in, quickly silencing the Polish 75mm gun which tried to respond. At point-blank range, the trajectories of the German shells were almost flat, and it appears that few exploded. Still, most of the wooden buildings collapsed, and large holes were made in the brick wall protecting the perimeter. Still, as Captain Kleikamp gave the order to open fire early that morning, the elderly battleship displayed her firepower. This announced to the German troops within Danzig the assault on the city had begun. The trees surrounding the Westerplatte were torn down, and the windows in the barracks were shattered instantly, while wooden buildings disintegrated due to the power of the guns. Then came the fuel barrels, which burst into flames. A war correspondent, Fritz Otto Busch, aboard the battleship, observed, "Schleswig-Holstein soon resembled a mountain, spewing flames enveloped in brown-yellow dust and clouds of smoke. Sheets of flame, meters long, shoot forth continuously. Machine guns and flak hammer away." Obviously, take the accounts of Busch with a grain of salt due to his position. Thick clouds of smoke began to rise above the Polish fort just as the ferry terminal was targeted and destroyed. Next came the shipyard and other positions near the fort, which Busch describes as iron, steel, stone, wood, and soil fly through the air, climb and then rain back down to earth. Time stands still. Spellbound eyes only see the bright glow of flame. Flames and rubble hurled sky high. Ears buzz from the sound of heavy shells firing and landing, from the rattling of machine guns and crashing and barking of flak. The upper deck of the warship was covered with empty shell casings, while thick clouds of smoke surrounded the turrets. The crew was working up quite the sweat in their effort. As the battleship sounded out, troops began capturing those critical points throughout the city, like the central railway station and post office. The Polish resistance was fierce, but initially caught off guard and continued to hold out throughout the day, eventually subdued. Meanwhile, just before 5 a.m., the 1st Naval Infantry began moving towards the Westerplatte under the cover of the guns of the battleship. The infantry faced ferocious fire from Polish positions, with Busch observing, "Wild machine gun fire burst out, rifle shots rattle, and hand grenades explode." The naval infantry in this attack did not know what they were going up against, as the maps they had did not have access to the positions of the Polish pillboxes. The barrage of shells from the 28cm guns were not as effective on the defenses because the projectiles needed more time to travel before they detonated, being only useful for covering the attack of the Marines. This attack fizzled out sometime later that morning. By 9 a.m., the Marines, having regrouped themselves and now reinforced by some 60 SS personnel, began the painfully slow advance over the barbed wire, tripwires, and branches brought down by the guns of the Schleswig-Holstein. At first, the Polish defenders of the Westerplatte were slow to react, but again the machine guns opened up, their positions being so well hidden that the German soldiers could not see their attackers. As the morning carried on and the Germans continued their probing attacks, all the while being picked off by Polish snipers from the Westerplatte, by midday it became clear that there were not enough Marines or SS men to capture the fortress. This thought was punctuated when Oberleutnant Henningsen was mortally wounded. Not waiting for the fortress to be captured, Albert Forster declared the Free City a part of Germany once more. The new Gauleiter wasted no time taking over the city and displaying Nazi imagery and slogans around the city. In the Bay of Danzig, Captain Kleikamp was reviewing the second failure to storm the Westerplatte. His Marines told him that they could not take the peninsula, while Friedrich Eberhard, the leader of the SS troops supporting the assault of the fortress, was determined to take the fortress by storming forward once again. Kleikamp disagreed with his assessment, taking the SS officer forward to meet the men he expected to take the fortress. Kleikamp moved Schleswig-Holstein away from the immediate vicinity of the depot and asked for assistance. As dusk approached on the Gulf of Danzig, a wounded soldier limped back to German lines, and only on the onset of darkness did the Marine think it safe to crawl back. He was one of 82 Germans killed or wounded on the first day. The second day was another interesting one for the old battleship, as plans for a concentrated raid by dive bombers to the Polish positions had been delayed and delayed again. Werhard writes, "The next day, Ju-87 Stukas commenced bombing Westerplatte while Schleswig-Holstein continued the bombardment from a distance, supplemented by T-196, the depot ship von der Golben, and land-based artillery. Yet, it was not until dusk that high above the bay did small dots begin to appear. As the bombs began to fall, observers aboard the battleship saw clouds of smoke and dust tumbling into the sky and a section of the fortress wall crumbling, followed by what appeared to be a white flag that was quickly hauled down. Historians disagree, with some believing that this flag had been hoisted by the commander of the fortress, a 42-year-old veteran of the Great War whose nerves had broken. Subsequently, his officers mutinied and resistance continued. Day by day, the Polish soldiers endured German bombs and shells from German ships, wreaking terrible destruction on the small peninsula, with one defender remarking, "Enemy artillery fire plowed the land, overturned trees. The men in the guard post were thrown up into the air like feathers. Shrapnel and lumps of concrete were flung into the mess hall that was serving as a dressing station for the one doctor who was struggling to cope with the injured men. The fortress by this point was nearly unrecognizable, with a junior officer writing in his diary, "In the cellar, soldiers lie along the walls, overly tired, the wounded on stretchers. The only light comes from a candle. Hygiene is beneath all contempt. The air is foul." Following further attacks from the Germans, by mid-morning on the 7th of September 1939, it had become too much for the men defending the Westerplatte, and shortly before 10 a.m., the white flag was raised for the final time over the depot. This time, the flag was not hauled down. The assault on the peninsula had cost the Germans nearly 400 casualties. As the Polish defenders marched into captivity, they were treated with respect by the German soldiers, who stood stiffly at attention. This treatment of prisoners was not universal, even in the city, as only days earlier, when some of the defenders of the post office surrendered, they were either shot or burned alive by flamethrowers. The battleship, having done its job, was not finished with its part in the Polish campaign. Heading to the Hella Peninsula, joined by our sister ship Schlesien, the guns of the two elderly battleships pounded Hella Peninsula for several days from September 23rd onward. Again taking from Har, smoke and dust from the exploding shells gave the impression of brutal efficiency, but the results were rather limited. Quite to the contrary, Schleswig-Holstein was damaged by return fire from the coastal batteries, after which the battleships withdrew, continuing the shelling from some 9 miles distance, reducing the effect further. The Stukas were sent to finish the job, going on to assist in the invasion of Denmark later in 1940, and returned to training duty following the successful invasion. Later on, she went to see some other bombardment missions and carry out training cruises for the majority of her wartime service. But the old battleship was taken into the Deutsche Werke dock at Gottenhofen, or today Gdynia, for conversion work into a convoy escort ship. With the removal of her existing secondary battery and anti-aircraft guns, she was to carry at least 6 10.5 centimeter guns, 10 4 centimeter Bofors, 4 3.7 centimeter guns, and as many as 22 centimeter guns. New fire control systems and rangefinders were going to be fit to the ship as well. Not only that, her machinery was going to get a refit, new pumps and degaussing equipment as well. But the refit didn't happen, and the armament changes most likely didn't occur. On December 18, 1944, while the ship was still in dock, she was heavily damaged during a raid by the RAF, with one bomb exploding in the port engine room, another one amidships, and a third passing through without exploding. March 21st, 1945, as the Soviets approached the city, her crew scuttled the damaged ship in shallow water. This is where things start to get interesting, as for many years, and to my confusion, it was believed that the ship was scrapped in place. However, in the early 1990s, researchers found out that the Soviets had towed her back to Tallinn in the spring of 1946. On September 26, 1946, she was enrolled into the Soviet fleet. It was reported that the Soviets were going to use her as a training ship, target ship, or some other use. But they soon found out that the ship was of no use, and on July 25, 1947, she was sunk in the Gulf of Finland. Whether she was ever given an official name isn't clear, although some sources claim she was given the name Borodino, this rather prestigious name being unlikely. Going back to September 1939, after the city of Danzig had been secured, Adolf Hitler arrived there on Tuesday the 19th, declaring it the happiest moment in the history of this city which goes back centuries, a moment which for many years every Danziger has ardently longed for. The capture of the port city would not last forever, as the Soviets advanced on the city in March of 1945. The German seizure of Danzig and Poland as a whole were rife with atrocities that should never be downplayed, along with Soviet involvement. The story of the Schleswig-Holstein is very interesting, as there is an argument to be made that the first shots of the Second World War were fired by an antiquated battleship that was obsolete before it even entered service. It should also be noted that there is evidence that her shelling was not that effective. Even with that, the battleship demonstrated that outdated ships can still pack a punch with their armament, assisting in the capture of the Westerplatte and claiming a spot for herself in the history books. Anyway, I hope you all found this video interesting, and please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great week.